Whoever said Stephen King can't write good endings might have been right, but they definitely need to watch the show 11/22/63 because I think this changes the narrative around Stephen King and I think is one of his best endings to date. I'm your host, Seb, and recently Netflix acquired a show called 11/22/63, an adaptation of one of Stephen King's novels. And I want to talk to you guys about it because I thought it was a really good show and I loved every single moment of it. 11/22/63 was a novel written by Stephen King, which had some of its parts changed for the on-screen adaptation. It follows this guy named Jake Epping, who is a teacher at a high school, and he has a friend named Al who has a time machine in his bar. I guess machine isn't the right thing, but he has a room that lets him travel back in time, and he recruits Jake to help him out. The reason for that is because Al can no longer go ahead and go back into the past, but for some reason this portal brings him back to October of 1960. And so Al convinces Jake that in order to fix history and save their timeline, he has to go back and stop JFK from getting assassinated. Now, I'm hoping that's not a lot of spoilers. It was only the first 30 minutes of the show right there, and that helps set up the plot line for the rest of the series. And the first thing that I want to talk about is how good the acting was in this series. I thought James Franco did a phenomenal job, as well as the rest of the cast. I think everybody acted their asses off. Like, not a single moment was I upset about a line that I felt like the delivery wasn't great or that I felt that the emotion wasn't there. I thought all of it was great. And I don't know if it was nominated for any Oscars or Emmys, but it definitely should join in the conversation. And then the biggest reason why I wanted to make this review is because I loved the theme of the story, especially the ending. I felt it was super emotional and super impactful. I'm not a big crier at the end of movies or shows, but the ending actually had me like gut wrenched and like heart throbbed, and I was just like, ooh. And it was emotional, guys. Like, I definitely recommend watching it. My only big non-spoiler complaint is the fact that the show had a couple of inconsistencies when it came to the plot line, and I feel like you can kind of disregard it just because the story was that good and very moving. But when you like sit down and focus on it, I think there are a couple of red flags that maybe raise a couple of questions that needed to be answered. But now with the opinions out of the way, I wanted to say that I definitely recommend this show. Anybody who decides to give the miniseries a try, I don't think you'll regret it. I don't think you'll waste your time. And I think it provided a good justice towards the history of the moment, but it also just was a fun story to travel into. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into spoilers. I love the show and it has me feeling a type of way. I wanted to make this review a few days ago, but I got a really bad cold, and the night that I was going to do it, I just couldn't even talk. I had a bad sore throat. So now it's been a whole weekend where I've had time to sit on it and think about what I wanted to say in this review. And let me tell you, my opinion hasn't changed. I still think it's great, and you guys are going to love it. So off the bat, the reason why Al recruits Jake is because he develops cancer. And Al was talking about how the past has a way of wanting to keep things the same. And so he believes that the past ended up giving him cancer to stop Al from getting close to the truth and stopping the events that eventually lead to JFK's assassination. This is why he goes ahead and recruits Jack, because he thought that Jack was a close friend, and he already had a lot of stuff set up for him for like fake identities and some money for him to get going. But Jake eventually ends up taking the offer and goes in the past and sees what it's all about. And right away, we get to see how the past interacts with people, because Jake decides to call his dad. And the past was not very happy about it. And it glitched his telephone and then eventually threw a car at it. And it made Jake a little bit scared, but he decided to stick it out. And then he ends up going to Dallas, where he needs to be for JFK's assassination attempt. And he starts trying to find a family to stay with. He eventually does find one thanks to Al's recommendations. And he goes and starts to getting close to the CIA and Oswald and starting to set things in place. But the past is not very happy with him. And so it ends up actually burning the house that he was staying in. And so he loses a lot of the records that he has, a lot of the sports bets that he has, everything that he needed to learn about history and to make it through is gone. And so he decides that he's done with this and he tries to go home. But then he stops on his way there because one of his adult students in the class happens to live in this nearby town that he's at. And unfortunately for the student, his name is Harry, he has a brain condition from brain trauma caused by his dad, who tried to murder his whole family. And so Jake decides that he wants to go ahead and stop this from happening. And in doing so, he gets caught by this guy named Bill, who Harry then recruits Bill to help him stop JFK from dying. They end up going back to Texas, and he meets this girl named Sadie, and the two of them fall in love. I missed the part where there was a little bit of a time jump. He had met Sadie the first time when he was in Dallas, but she was married with a husband. We get that time jump when they go back into Dallas and he becomes a teacher and Bill stays at home. And then at the school that he's working at, Harry ends up meeting Sadie again, and that's when they fall in love. So the whole time, Jake and Bill are spying on the CIA and Oswald, trying to figure out whose idea it is to stop JFK so that they can kill the right person. But in doing so, Bill ends up getting really upset and close to the Oswalds because he doesn't like how Oswald is treating his wife. And Bill ends up having a crush on Oswald's wife, which is a crazy twist. But in the meantime, Jake has risen up Sadie and he's trying to get close with her, and they have a whole subplot line. In the end, Bill ends up unaliving himself, and then Harry and Sadie end up fighting Oswald because it's revealed that it's only Oswald who wants to kill JFK. And in their fight with Oswald, Sadie ends up getting shot and killed. Harry ends up getting regarded as a hero, and he goes back to the future to find out that the world is actually not a better place than what it was when he first went through. You can see that everything's been blown up and that there's been some warfare in the US, and it's not looking good. So he decides that he wants to go back in time and do things the right way, where he's just going to let JFK die and he wants to spend his life with Sadie. But the past isn't happy about that. The past doesn't want him to spend the life with Sadie. And so he realizes that in order to preserve the future that they had, that he has to let everything go and just let it be as it is. And that was the quick synopsis of the show. So right off the bat, I want to go ahead and talk about the things that I really enjoyed about the show. And the first thing's got to be the pacing. I felt that every episode was emotional and impactful. None of it felt too draggy. Like it didn't feel like we were getting a lot of exposition or that the conversations weren't meaningful at all. Everything was relevant. I also love Jack and Sadie's relationship. There was a subplot between the two of them where Jake ends up actually saving Sadie from her abusive ex-husband, and it helps them fall in love a little bit more. He ends up coming clean to Sadie about being from the future, and so they end up getting closer together. And the whole thing at the end where she was saying that, you know, like, I'm in this too now, like we're in this together, and she wanted to help him kill Oswald. I think it was great. It showed how much of a team that they were, and they were really like team players. And for the time period too, like Sadie was just ahead of her league. You know, 1960s women weren't given as much opportunities as Sadie was, especially not the relationship she had with Jake. Then I also really like Jake and Bill's dynamic. I thought that them two together were really good at the start. They were like brothers and they were working on this mission together. But you could see that over time, having Bill reclused and having him being the one listening to most of the dilemma, it really started to take a toll on Bill and it started to ruin their relationship. And I think that was really important to the story as well, because not everything can be peachy keen, especially not when you tell someone that you're from the future and you recruit them to help you stop an assassination. Like, something's got to go wrong there. And I like the idea that it was the past that ended up splitting them apart, that started making the tension grow to try and stop them from getting close. I can't confirm it. It was never like really explored or confirmed in the series, but I like thinking that maybe that was the reason why, not just because their relationship started to sour, but maybe it was influenced by the past. I'm also really glad that they didn't explain a lot of the time travel rules. It wasn't really relevant to the story, and I think it would have taken away some if they tried to make sense of it all. It was just really good how they kept it plain and simple. You go back, it stays. If you go back again, it doesn't stay. And then my favorite part about the show, the ending. It was super emotional. What ends up happening is Jake in the future is going back to his teaching life, and you can see that he's obviously heartbroken that he doesn't have Sadie with him anymore. And he decides to look her up and sees that she's still alive and that she's become a really popular figure in Texas. So he goes to celebrate one of her anniversaries. I think it was like 50 years of service or something. He ends up going to the party and seeing her, and then he ends up dancing with her. And before this, he tried to go back in time that second time around to find Sadie, and he ends up talking to her. But before he introduces himself, he decides that he doesn't want to go down this path anymore, and he lets her go to return back to the regular timeline. And so technically she has seen him before, and while she might not remember it off the top of her head, it's probably one of those things that subconsciously, like if she saw the face again, she'd be like, huh, that looks familiar. And so I think it was one of those moments where she was like, he looks really familiar. And the two start dancing, and she says to him, I know you. where have we met before? And to where he responds with, we were together in another life. And obviously that brought tears to my face. I was watching it with my girlfriend and she had the waterworks too. Like both of us were just like melting away. And I thought that that was beautiful. And then it cuts out and like fades away. And that was the end of the show. And it was just surreal to me because it kept the same theme where you can think about changing the past, but it doesn't always make things better. And for him to still have that moment that only he knows, that only he holds on to, and he loves her so much and let her go so that way she can have her life and he can have his life and they can both not necessarily spend their lives together, but both still have a life against each other. And just beautiful. For what I didn't like about the show, it was the past guy who kept showing up very inconsistently. He makes warnings to Jake the whole time saying that, oh, you shouldn't be here. Like, the past isn't like this. And then he has this whole story about how he keeps trying to go back in time to save his daughter from dying and how every single time she always dies no matter what. And I think it was kind of important to the story, but they don't really explain anything outside of that because he was trying to warn Jake about not changing the past. But the only time it mattered was whenever he was with Sadie. Like, he didn't show up when he was trying to kill Oswald. He didn't show up at any of the other moments where he was getting close to information regarding Oswald. He only showed up whenever it mattered to Sadie. And so in my head, I'm thinking like, well, if he's supposed to be relevant to the story, why isn't he showing up for Oswald, but he's only showing up for Sadie? He also has a lot of weird appearances where he appears very heavily in the first 2 episodes, takes a break for a few episodes, and then on like the last 3, he's making like one scene appearances. But again, it's like, where has he been the whole time? Like, why is it just now? Only at the beginning, only at the end? I don't know. That's my take on it. I also didn't really like some of the character endings. Al was a big one where we only heard about him at the beginning, but didn't really hear much about his ending and if he ended up surviving cancer or whatever ended up becoming of him and Jake's relationship after Jake tried to go back in time. I also didn't really like Bill's ending because Jake ends up putting him into a psych ward and he's left there for a few months because Jake ends up getting a concussion and forgets everything that happened to him. And then he goes back to save Bill from the psych ward. And Bill is obviously traumatized and he's telling him like, oh, you're not from the future. Like, that's not real, all this stuff. But Jake is like, no. Like, you were right. Like, I am from the future and I need your help to like help me solve this stuff. And I'm going to take you out of here and we're going to come back together. And he says to him, well, if you're really like my friend, why did you put me through this? And then after that, he ends up jumping off the building because nobody was supervising him. And that was just really sad. I wish he had a better ending, especially just because how much he went through, but it just kind of sucks that that's how it was. And then also Deke, the school principal in the past, I wish he had a better ending as well. We didn't really get to hear anything about him or like what his life ended up becoming. We didn't really hear much about what happened to him. And I wish that we got a little bit more exposition because he was a really important character for Jake in the past and was a really good mentor figure for Jake. And so I just wish we got a little bit more information. My last big complaint about the show is once I got to the ending, I was thinking back to what Miss Mimi had said to Jake about you can't let Sadie go. Like, me and Deke had spent our lives next to each other, but not with each other. And so don't make the same mistake as us. And I thought at the time it was really emotional because it meant that he was going to probably propose to her and that they were going to try to be together and everything. But what ended up happening is he let her go so that she could live her own life instead of dying every single time he went back to the past. To that I say, then what the fuck was the point of the line? Like, I wish she had said something and said about how, you know, you have to love her and because of that you have to like make sacrifices. I think that would have been a lot more impactful because at the end he ends up sacrificing their love because he cares about her so much and he wants her to live a happy life. And so instead of saying like, oh, we have to live it together or like next to each other, which they ended up not being able to do, I wish she had said something more powerful about loving one another and what that really means. So that was my last really big complaint about it. I just wish that that message had been a little bit different. Still a great message, just irrelevant at the end of the show. All that to say, I definitely recommend watching this show. I think it's now one of my top 10 favorite shows of all time. And I would definitely rewatch it again. Might become like one of those like watch it back every couple of years. I just loved the message, loved the acting, everything about it was great. A couple of inconsistencies that I mentioned, but apart from that, I can do it again. So with all that information, I hope you guys can give it a chance And maybe you guys will say the same thing about, hey, maybe Stephen King isn't so bad about writing endings. Till then, I guess all you guys have to refer off of is that Wild It ending. But I definitely recommend giving the show a chance. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.